The Apocalypse of John. The most famous apocalypse in history comes from this Christian tradition, the Book of Revelation, attributed to John, which closes the New Testament. This text shaped the Western imagination of the end of the world. Written at the end of the 1st century in a context of a Roman persecution of Christians, it blends vivid imagery with messages of resistance. The narrative is packed with symbols. 7 seals being opened, 7 trumpets sounding, 4 horsemen bringing conquest, war, famine, and death. These weren't just religious poetry. They carried direct references to politics and the struggles of the time, functioning as coded metaphors. The official meaning within Christianity is the promise of final judgment. Evil will be defeated, the faithful rewarded, and a new heaven and a new earth will arise. In other words, it's less about destruction and more about renewal and hope. In modern conspiracy theories, however, Revelation became a handbook of predictions. Every global crisis, from world wars to pandemics, has been tied to a verse, as if the text were a coded prophecy waiting to be cracked. The word apocalypse in Greek doesn't mean end of the world, but rather revelation. It's about unveiling what was hidden. The ominous tone only came later in popular tradition, and it's precisely the powerful image of the horseman that opens the door to the next prophecy. Another end of the world, one where even the gods themselves can die. The Viking Ragnarök. In Norse mythology, the apocalypse arrives as a cosmic battle. Ragnarök is the great war at the end of time, described in the Edda poems, compiled in medieval Iceland but rooted in far older traditions. Here, even the gods are not safe. Odin, the All-Father, falls before the giant wolf Fenrir. Thor faces the world serpent Jormungandr, and both perish in the clash. The scene is one of fire, ice, and raging seas, a universal collapse that engulfs gods, monsters, and humans alike. The official meaning in Norse tradition is not just destruction. After Ragnarök, the earth is reborn green, with human survivors to repopulate the world. It's the cycle of death and renewal, deeply tied to the natural worldview of a people living through harsh winters and fleeting summers. For modern conspiracy theorists, Ragnarök has been linked to global disasters, from the threat of nuclear war to the climate crisis, as if the defeated gods symbolized forces of nature spinning out of control. Interestingly, the Vikings took this idea of an inevitable fate seriously. Ragnarök wasn't something that could be prevented. Even the gods knew they would lose. Paradoxically, this gave meaning to courage, to fight, even when the end was already written. While the Vikings saw the apocalypse as an inevitable struggle, in the East a very different version arose, less explosive but equally unsettling. Not a battle, but a long, creeping age of darkness leading to collapse. The Hindu Kali Yuga. In Hindu tradition, the end of the world is slow, like a long decay. The concept of Kali Yuga comes from the sacred Puranas, describing the last of the 4 cosmic ages. It is the dark age, marked by corruption, deceit, and the spiritual decline of humanity. Historically, the idea appears between the 4th and 5th centuries, but it's tied to India's much older cyclical view of time. The universe passes through endless cycles of creation and destruction, without an absolute beginning or end. Kali Yuga is just one phase of this cycle, but the bleakest one. During Kali Yuga, morality collapses, violence rises, and even human lifespan shrinks. At the end of this age, Vishnu returns as Kalki, a warrior riding a white horse to destroy evil and usher in a new golden age. Kali Yuga is often cited as an explanation for today's crises: wars, inequality, pollution, political chaos. Some even calculate specific dates for its end, though the Hindu texts themselves speak of millions of years in duration. For some spiritual teachers, Kali Yuga doesn't need to be seen only as decline. It's also the age when enlightenment is easiest to achieve, precisely because the contrast with chaos is so stark. The Mayan Prophecies. In 2012, the whole world seemed to share the same question. Did the Mayans predict the end of the world? The idea spread through media, films, and books, but it actually came from a misunderstanding of the Mayan calendar. The so-called long count calendar organized time into 5,125-year cycles. One of those cycles ended on December 21st, 2012. For some modern interpreters, this sounded like a marker of imminent apocalypse. But historically, the Mayans didn't speak of destruction. For them, it was simply the closing of one great cycle and the start of another, like turning the page of a massive cosmic calendar. The official meaning then wasn't end of the world, but renewal. Still, popular imagination turned the date into one of the biggest collective scares of our era. People sold bunkers, communities isolated themselves, and businesses even profited from apocalypse anxiety. 2012 was linked to almost everything: planetary alignments, alien invasions, solar flares. Each theory tried to make the date fit as a global breaking point. For the Mayans, those cycles were like the breathing of the cosmos. Each closing brought rituals of renewal, not despair. So while the modern world expected fire and destruction, the Mayans themselves would likely have celebrated it like the changing of a season. And this difference in interpretation leads to the next twist. While the Mayans were misunderstood, there was a man who wrote so cryptically that to this day, every catastrophe seems to fit into his words. Nostradamus. Few names are so tied to apocalyptic predictions as Nostradamus. The 16th century, French doctor and astrologer published an enigmatic book called The Prophecies, filled with poetic quatrains describing visions of the future in ambiguous, almost coded language. The book appeared in 1555, in a Europe torn by religious wars, plagues, and political crises. Nostradamus deliberately wrote in an obscure style, mixing French, Latin, and astrological references, probably to avoid censorship. The meaning of his quatrains is vague. He never said outright that the world would end, but spoke of fallen kings, burning cities, and disasters that echoed the fears of his time. Over the centuries, however, his words were reinterpreted to fit every tragedy, from the French Revolution to 9/11. Nostradamus became a kind of universal prophet. With a little creative reading, any global event could be made to fit his quatrains. That includes multiple end-of-the-world dates, endlessly reinterpreted when they failed to come true. His fame didn't truly take off in the 16th century, but in the 19th, when his writings were rediscovered and popularized, transforming him into the prophet we know today. Before that, he was remembered more as a doctor against the plague than as a visionary. If Nostradamus seemed to speak in riddles, another religious tradition laid out a far clearer script for the end times. The Islamic Apocalyptic Messiah. In Islamic imagination, the end of times also follows its own script. It appears in different traditions within Islam but revolves around two central figures: the Mahdi, a just leader who will rise to restore faith, and Isa, Jesus himself, who returns to defeat evil. These ideas are found in the Hadiths, collections of sayings attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, compiled between the 8th and 9th centuries. In them, the apocalypse is described as a series of signs: wars, injustice, earthquakes, all leading to a great final battle against the Dajjal, a deceiving figure similar to Christianity's Antichrist. For believers, this means the triumph of justice and the restoration of divine order. The end is not mere destruction, but a realignment of the world with God's will. These signs are constantly linked to current events. Wars in the Middle East, global crises, and even political leaders have been interpreted as proof that the Mahdi is about to appear. This political and cultural use of prophecy keeps it alive in headlines even today. Despite differences between Christianity and Islam, both share the idea that Jesus plays a central role in the end times, a point of convergence often forgotten when comparing the two faiths. And from here we take a leap, out of religion and into science, where a theory emerges that predicts no trumpets or messiahs, but explains cosmic silence as a terrifying sign. The scientific great filter. Among all end-of-the-world ideas, perhaps the most unsettling comes from modern science. It's the hypothesis of the great filter, created to explain the famous Fermi paradox. If the universe is so vast and full of planets, why don't we see any advanced civilizations out there? The idea emerged in the 1990s, in debates on astrobiology and evolution. The logic is simple. Maybe there's a barrier somewhere in evolution that prevents societies from reaching an interstellar stage. This obstacle could be early. Life itself might be extremely rare, or it could lie ahead in some inevitable event of self-destruction. It's a scientific reflection. If the great filter is in our future, it could mean that every technological civilization eventually destroys itself, whether through nuclear wars, environmental collapse, or disasters born from its own technology. For conspiracy theorists, the great filter is proof that governments already know humanity's inevitable fate, or that global disasters are being deliberately accelerated. But in academia, it remains more of a thought experiment than a literal prophecy. Some scientists argue that finding simple life on Mars would actually be terrible news. It would suggest life is common, and therefore the filter likely lies ahead, still waiting for us. If the greatest danger is not a god or a star, but the very technology we create, what happens when our machines begin to surpass us? The judgment of the machines. In modern imagination, there's a more direct fear, being overtaken by our own creations. The so-called judgment of the machines was born in science fiction, but today it fuels serious debates in technology. The idea gained momentum in the 20th century with works like 2001, A Space Odyssey, and The Terminator, where artificial intelligences rebel against humanity. These stories reflected both the fascination and fear of technological progress during the Cold War and space race. In academia, the real meaning is a discussion of existential risks. Could a superintelligent AI, without any malicious intent, make decisions incompatible with human survival? This debate now involves philosophers, computer scientists, and even governments, eager to regulate technology before it's too late. Some claim the judgment of the machines is already happening in secret, from autonomous military systems slipping out of control to theories of AI networks quietly dominating economies and governments. Even before modern computing, this fear existed. In the 19th century, writer Samuel Butler speculated that machines might evolve like living species, a century before artificial intelligence was born for real. The Illuminati. The name Illuminati appears in almost every conversation about secret societies. From action movies to internet theories, it's become the universal symbol of power in the shadows.